The wind howled through the naked branches of the northern forest, carrying with it the promise of another storm. Bill Thompson stood at his ranger station's window, watching fat snowflakes spiral down from a steel-gray sky. His weathered hands clutched a missing persons report, the third one this month. Something wasn't right in his corner of the wilderness. The station's radio crackled to life.
Thompson, do you copy? Over.
I'm rating you. Dispatch. Go ahead.
We've got another situation up by Blackwood Lake. 2 more campers failed to check in. Last known location was Campsite 7, about 6 miles up the North Trail. With this storm coming in...
Bill's jaw tightened.
10-4 dispatch. I'll head out now. Better chance of finding them before the weather turns. Over.
Be careful out there, Bill. Something's not sitting right about all this. Over and out.
As he gathered his gear, Bill couldn't shake the growing unease in his gut. 15 years as a ranger had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now they were screaming at him to stay put. But that wasn't who he was. People were missing, and he had a job to do. He methodically checked his pack: emergency supplies, first aid kit, satellite phone, flare gun, and enough provisions for 3 days. The weight of his rifle offered some comfort as he slung it over his shoulder. Whatever was out there, he'd be ready. The cold hit him like a physical wall as he stepped outside. His breath crystallized instantly, joining the swirling dance of snowflakes. The forest stretched before him, a maze of white and shadow that seemed to swallow all sound. His snowmobile roared to life, the engine's growl oddly muted in the thick air. As he followed the trail north, the daylight began to fade. The storm was moving faster than predicted, dark clouds roiling overhead like smoke. Bill checked his GPS. 4 miles to go. He'd have to hurry if he wanted to reach the campsite before visibility dropped to 0. The first sign something was wrong came 3 miles in. Deep gouges marked a massive pine tree, too high up for any bear. The bark had been torn away in great strips, revealing pale wood beneath. Bill killed the snowmobile's engine and approached on foot, his hand instinctively moving to his rifle. The cuts were fresh, maybe a day old. They started 8 feet up the trunk and raked downward, each groove deep enough to sink his finger into. Whatever had made them was big, bigger than any animal that should be in these woods. A sound caught his attention, fabric flapping in the wind. 20 yards off the trail, a torn backpack hung from a broken branch. The snow beneath it was stained with old blood, now mostly buried by fresh powder. Bill's throat went dry as he documented the scene with his camera. The damage to the pack looked like it had been done by the same claws that marked the tree. The wind picked up, driving sheets of snow that cut visibility to mere yards. Bill knew he should turn back, but the thought of those missing campers pushed him forward. He remounted his snowmobile and pressed on, fighting against the growing storm. The trail narrowed as it wound through a dense stand of pines. In the gathering gloom, the trees seemed to lean inward, their branches reaching like grasping fingers. The beam of his headlight caught something ahead, a splash of color against the white. Bill's heart sank as he recognized a camping tent, or what remained of one. The sight was a disaster. The tent had been shredded, its contents scattered across the snow. 2 sleeping bags lay nearby, ripped open like gutted fish. A cooking pot still hung over the remains of a fire pit, now filled with snow. But what chilled Bill to his core were the tracks. They were like nothing he'd ever seen, massive prints that seemed almost human, but grotesquely elongated with sharp claw marks at each toe. They circled the campsite in a predatory pattern before leading off into the forest. And they were fresh. A branch snapped somewhere in the darkness beyond his light's reach. Bill whirled, rifle raised, but saw only swirling snow. Another crack, closer this time, followed by a sound that made his blood freeze, a high, keening wail that was neither human nor animal. The storm hit full force then, a white wall of wind and ice that threatened to knock him off his feet. Bill knew he needed shelter, and fast. Through the curtain of snow, he spotted a dark shape, an old cabin barely visible among the trees. It wasn't on his maps, but right now any port in a storm would do. As he fought his way toward the cabin, the wailing came again. Closer now. Something was moving through the trees parallel to his path, just out of sight. Bill could hear branches breaking under heavy weight, could feel eyes watching him through the whiteout. He reached the cabin's porch just as his headlamp caught a glimpse of movement. A tall, impossibly thin figure darting between the trees. The image burned into his mind. Pale, stretched limbs, too many joints, and eyes that glowed like embers in the dark. Bill slammed through the cabin's door and threw the bolt home, his heart thundering in his chest. As night fell outside, something began to scratch at the walls, testing for weakness. And in the howling wind, he could have sworn he heard his name being called, spoken in voices he recognized.
Bill, let me in. It's cold out here.
The voices of the missing campers. He was no longer searching for survivors. He was about to become a victim himself. The darkness pressed against the cabin's frost-covered windows like a living thing, hungry and patient. Bill Thompson's labored breath formed ghostly shapes in the frigid air as he took stock of his temporary sanctuary. The cabin's interior told a story of abandonment, dust-covered furniture, cobwebs draped like funeral shrouds, and the musty scent of decay that seemed to seep from the very walls. His injured leg throbbed where he'd caught it on a broken floorboard during his desperate entry. A quick examination by flashlight revealed a deep gash, already crusting with frozen blood. He'd have to deal with that, but first things first, securing the perimeter. The scratching continued, methodical and deliberate, moving from wall to wall. Each rake of those impossibly long claws sent vibrations through the cabin's ancient timber, like fingers testing the strings of some macabre instrument. Bill forced himself to breathe slowly, fighting down the primal urge to panic. Those voices still called to him through the storm, a chorus of the damned.
It's nice out here.
Bill, help us.
He recognized Sarah Chen's voice, one of the missing hikers. It came from directly outside the window, perfectly mimicking the cheerful tone she'd used when checking in at his station just days ago. But there was something wrong about it, a hollow quality that made his skin crawl.
Don't leave us out here in the cold, Bill.
Another voice. Marcus Webb, the geology student who'd vanished last week.
We're so hungry.
The beam of Bill's flashlight revealed the cabin's interior in segments. A stone fireplace choked with old ashes. A kitchen area with rusted implements hanging from hooks. A narrow staircase leading to what he assumed was a loft. The furniture was sparse, a heavy wooden table, 3 chairs, and what might have been a bed frame, now collapsed in one corner. Something caught his eye, markings on the wall beside the fireplace. As he moved closer, his light revealed dozens of tally marks carved into the wood, along with a journal wedged behind a loose stone in the hearth. The leather cover was cracked and stained, its pages yellow with age. A particularly violent gust of wind rattled the windows, and with it came a sound that stopped Bill's heart, the distinctive crack of splitting wood. He swung his light toward the door just in time to see long, pale fingers, more bone than flesh, threading through a widening gap in the planks. Moving on instinct, Bill grabbed one of the chairs and wedged it under the door handle. He needed time. Time to think. Time to plan. Time to understand what he was dealing with. The journal might hold answers, but first he had to survive the night, and the fingers withdrew. And for a moment there was silence. Then something heavy landed on the roof with enough force to shake dust from the rafters. Slow, deliberate footsteps tracked across the ceiling, each one accompanied by the groan of stressed timber. Bill's light beam caught movement through a gap in the boards overhead, a glimpse of stretched alabaster skin pulled tight over impossible angles. He flipped open the journal with trembling hands, scanning the faded pages by flashlight. March 15, 1924. Third night on patrol. The logging camp sent word of workers gone missing. Found tracks in the snow unlike anything I've seen. The Indians speak of a creature that walks like a man but hunts like a demon. They call it Wendigo. Say it was once human before the hunger changed it. The footsteps stopped directly above him. Snow sifted through the cracks, dusting Bill's shoulders. A low, rattling sound filled the air, breathing but wrong, like wind through a corpse's teeth. April 2nd, 1924. It mimics their voices. Dear God, it uses their voices to lure others out. The hunger never stops. It doesn't just want flesh, it feeds on fear, on despair. The longer it hunts you, the more it learns, the more it becomes you. The roof creaked ominously. Bill's flashlight beam caught another glimpse through the gaps. A face peering down at him, stretched and distorted like a reflection in troubled water. The eyes glowed with an inner fire, and the mouth. The mouth contained too many teeth, arranged in concentric circles like a lamprey's maw. Last entry. The fire keeps it at bay, but my wood is almost gone. If anyone finds this, know that bullets won't stop it. Cold iron slows it down. But fire is the only thing it truly fears. God forgive me, I should have burned this whole forest down when I had the chance. The temperature in the cabin plummeted suddenly, frost crystallizing on the walls in fractal patterns. Bill's breath came out in great billowing clouds as the scratching resumed, more frenzied now. The voices outside had changed, becoming a cacophony of pleading and threats, each one wearing the face of someone he'd failed to save. Through the window, he caught sight of something moving through the storm, a figure impossibly tall and thin, swaying like a tree in the wind. As it turned toward the cabin, Bill saw his own face stretched across its features, his own voice calling out in a parody of welcome.
Welcome.
The Wendigo had learned his name, his voice, his fears, and the night was still young. The old cabin groaned under the assault of wind and monster alike, its timbers remembering summers long past when the sap ran sweet and warm. Now there was only winter, only ice, only the scraping of otherworldly claws against weathered wood. Bill Thompson pressed his back against the wall beside the fireplace, the ancient journal clutched to his chest like a talisman. Moonlight filtered through the gaps in the roof, casting prison bar shadows across the floor. Each beam caught swirling motes of dust and snow, creating ethereal patterns that danced and shifted with every gust of wind. The temperature had dropped so low that the moisture in Bill's breath froze instantly, tiny crystals drifting down like diamond dust. The Wendigo's latest assault had subsided into an expectant silence. Bill could sense it out there, circling the cabin with predatory patience. Its footfalls in the deep snow made a sound like softly breaking glass. Occasionally a shadow would pass by one of the windows, a towering silhouette of impossible angles and elongated limbs that seemed to bend in ways that defied anatomy. Bill's gaze fell on the ancient fireplace, remembering the journal's words about fire being the creature's only true fear. The hearth still held the remnants of someone's last desperate night. Half-burnt logs turned to stone by time, strips of fabric that might once have been clothing, and beneath it all, a scattering of bones that gleamed like pearl in his flashlight's beam. His injured leg had begun to stiffen, the blood freezing in crusty layers around the wound. The cold was working its way into his bones now, each breath a little more labored than the last. He knew the signs of hypothermia well enough. If he didn't get warm soon, the Wendigo wouldn't need to break in. The cold would do its work for it. A sound caught his attention, the soft crunch of snow beneath the window. Bill held his breath, listening. Something was being deliberately placed in the snow, piece by piece. The voices came again, but this time they were singing, a discordant chorus of all the lost souls the creature had consumed. Ring around the ranger, pocket full of fears, ashes, ashes, we all fall down. Children's voices now, high and sweet and terrible. Bill forced himself to look out the window. His flashlight beam revealed a grotesque display. The Wendigo had arranged personal effects from its victims in a crude circle around the cabin. Torn backpacks, shredded clothing, broken cameras, and things he didn't want to examine too closely glinted in the harsh light. As he watched, the creature stepped into view. It moved with a fluid grace that denied its misshapen form, each step precise and deliberate. The moonlight seemed to pass through its pale flesh, revealing shadows of bones that shifted and flowed like quicksilver. Its face was a nightmare of adaptation, features constantly morphing as it cycled through its collected identities. The Wendigo raised one elongated arm, pointing a finger tipped with a crystalline claw directly at Bill. When it spoke, it used his own voice, but layered with echoes of all its previous victims.
You can't save them, Bill. You couldn't save any of them. But if you join us, if you let the hunger in, you'll never have to feel the cold again.
The truth hit Bill like a physical blow. The missing hikers, the strange tracks, the claw marks too high for any natural creature. It had all been building to this moment. The Wendigo hadn't just been hunting. It had been studying, learning, preparing. Each victim had made it stronger, smarter, more capable of luring the next. and now it wanted him, not just his flesh and fear, but his knowledge of the forest, his understanding of search and rescue procedures. With his memories, it could become an apex predator, unlike anything the wilderness had ever seen. The revelation sparked something in Bill's mind. The creature was intelligent, adaptive, and patient. Too patient. Why hadn't it simply broken down the door? The answer lay in the journal's pages, in the story of that long-ago night when another ranger had faced this same horror. The Wendigo was playing with him, yes, but it was also waiting. Waiting for the cold to weaken him, waiting for despair to cloud his judgment, waiting for that crucial moment when survival seemed impossible, and its offer of transformation would sound almost reasonable. Bill's numbed fingers found the flare gun in his pocket. One shot. One chance to prove the journal right about the creature's fear of fire, but not yet. Not until he was sure. Not until he could make it count. Outside, the Wendigo began to pace, its movements precise and rhythmic. It was marking time, conducting its own funeral march as the temperature continued to drop, and the long night stretched ahead. Bill checked his watch, 10:47 p.m. Dawn was still 8 hours away, and the storm showed no signs of breaking. In the distance, wolves began to howl, their voices rising in harmony with the wind. But these weren't ordinary wolves. The sounds they made carried echoes of human screams, a chorus of the damned calling out to their transformed kin. The hunt was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The witching hour descended upon the cabin like a shroud, bringing with it a silence so profound that Bill Thompson could hear the crystallization of his own breath. The Wendigo's relentless psychological siege had transformed the night into an endless parade of horrors, each hour marked not by minutes, but by fresh torments designed to crack his resolve. Frost patterns bloomed across the cabin's windows like deadly flowers, their intricate shapes forming faces that seemed to mouth silent screams. The cold had become a living thing, wrapping around Bill's bones with lover's intimacy. His injured leg had gone numb hours ago, the blood frozen in darkened patterns that resembled the very claw marks he'd found on those trees, a grim preview of his possible fate. The flare gun weighed heavy in his hand, its single shot representing both salvation and damnation. In the depths of this endless night, Bill had come to understand the true nature of his adversary. The Wendigo wasn't simply a predator, it was hunger incarnate, a force of nature twisted into consciousness by desperation and survival. Through gaps in the cabin's walls, he caught fragments of its endless transformations. Sarah Chen's delicate fingers elongating into crystalline claws, Marcus Webb's athletic frame stretching like taffy until joints cracked and reformed, and most disturbingly, his own face reflected back at him, distorted by an hunger that threatened to devour the world.
Getting colder, isn't it, Ranger?
The thing wearing his voice called out.
Can you feel it yet? The way the hunger burns even as the frost claims you? It's beautiful, this transformation. Like becoming a god.
Bill's fingers tightened around the flare gun as he orchestrated his final gambit. The journal's author had left one last gift, a crude map scratched into the cabin's floorboards, revealed only when Bill had scraped away years of dust. It showed an underground cellar accessible through a trapdoor that had been deliberately concealed. Now, as the night reached its darkest hour, Bill understood why. The cellar wasn't meant as a refuge. It was a trap. The previous ranger had lured the Wendigo below ground, where its tremendous height would become a weakness in the confined space. The creature's patience finally broke around 3 a.m. The roof suddenly exploded inward, showering Bill with splinters and snow, as impossibly long limbs reached down like pale tree branches. He rolled away, barely avoiding those grasping fingers, and made his decision. It was time.
You want me?
Bill shouted, his voice hoarse from cold and fear.
Then come and get me.
He yanked away the rotting carpet, revealing the trapdoor beneath. The Wendigo's assault paused, its glowing eyes fixed on this new development. Bill could almost see it calculating, weighing options with an intelligence that made it all the more terrifying. The creature moved with liquid grace, flowing through the roof's opening like smoke given form. In the confined space of the cabin, its true size became apparent. It had to bend almost double, its joints cracking and reforming to accommodate the space. The faces of its victims shifted across its features like reflections in troubled water. Bill threw open the trapdoor and half climbed, half fell down the ladder into darkness. The Wendigo followed, its body contracting and twisting to fit through the opening. In the cellar's close confines, the cold was absolute, the kind of deep chill that existed before the world knew warmth. The beam of Bill's flashlight revealed walls lined with ancient shelves, their contents long since turned to dust. But it wasn't storage he was looking for. It was the barrels stacked in the corner, their metal bands rusted but intact. The sharp scent of old kerosene filled the air. The Wendigo's display of its victims had revealed its fatal flaw: pride. It couldn't resist showing off its collection, proving its superiority. Now, trapped in this underground space, that same pride would be its undoing.
Hungry?
Bill whispered, raising the flare gun.
Let's see how you handle some heat.
The creature lunged, its form expanding to fill the cellar like a pale tsunami. Bill fired the flare directly into the kerosene barrels. The world exploded into light and heat and screaming. Oh, such screaming. The Wendigo's collected voices all cried out at once as flames engulfed its twisted form. Bill scrambled up the ladder as fire chased him, the cellar becoming a furnace that consumed decades of darkness. Through the inferno, he glimpsed the Wendigo thrashing, its flesh blackening and peeling away to reveal something underneath that defied description. Layers upon layers of partially absorbed victims, all trying to escape their prison of flesh. The cabin was nothing but a funeral pyre now, flames reaching toward the star-filled sky. Bill Thompson limped away through the snow, his body battered but his spirit unbroken. Behind him, the Wendigo's death keens faded into the night, becoming indistinguishable from the wind's howl. Dawn found him half frozen but alive, stumbling into the ranger station as the first rays of sun painted the wilderness gold. The official report would mention a tragic cabin fire, probably caused by old kerosene barrels. The missing hikers would remain missing, their families left to wonder. But on cold nights when the wind howls through the trees and shadows move in ways they shouldn't, Bill Thompson sits in his station and watches the forest. Sometimes he thinks he hears voices calling his name, wearing familiar tones that echo with hunger, and he keeps his flare gun close, knowing that some appetites can never truly be satisfied. After all, in this frozen wilderness, there are worse things than death. Sometimes it's not the cold you have to fear, it's the hunger that comes with it. Thanks for making it to the end of the story. This one I loved. Had a real Tales from the Crypt vibe to it. I could just see the old crypt keeper cackling as he told the story of Bill Thompson. Maybe one day I will revisit the Wendigo. I hope that you like the story. The sound design on this story was a bit of a challenge. I found what sounds I could, but some parts would have needed some custom sounds, and I'm not set up to make them right now. If any of you know of a better website than Pixabay to get sound effects and music from for the horror genre, then please let me know. I'm open to suggestions. Before I go, I want to say hello to the new subscribers, and also, welcome to the fold. Please let me know of any other cryptids you'd like to hear a story about. Until next time, friends, stay warm and keep your eyes open for any strange creatures in the forest.